Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 606. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about castles and palaces, Viking ships and islands, Legos and Little Mermaids as we go to Denmark. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. I'm on the road re-recording this part of the intro in a small little hotel room in the Florida Keys with the cable that I had to buy because I forgot the one. So without further ado, let's talk about Denmark. I'd like to welcome to the show Joe Trevillion from London, who has come to talk to us about Denmark. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Why are we talking about Denmark today?
In my opinion, I think Denmark is one of the most underrated countries in Europe. A lot of people tend to skip it because it's very small. And people, when they think of Europe, they think of London, Paris, Germany, Italy, France, Spain. And Denmark often gets overlooked.
I would have to say that I'm one of those people. I'm Danish. I'm half Danish, and I only got to Denmark,
Okay.
I think it was last year, after all the travels that we've done, and loved it. So I was looking forward to this show. And what kind of itinerary do you recommend?
Most people will have to go to Copenhagen because that's where the major international airport is.
Mm-hmm.
Like Copenhagen, you spend a few days in anyway. After that, you're on the actual island called Sjælland, Zealand, they call it in English. And there you have Helsingør, which is a little town just up from Copenhagen. It's where the Shakespeare's Hamlet, the castle's set. And then you have Roskilde, which is sort of in the middle of Sjælland. That's like the old capital, and there's reasons to visit there as well. After that, I would suggest going to an island called Funen, which is the second island in between the two, like the mainland and Sjælland, which is the home of Odense. There's a small island called Ærø, which you probably won't be able to say, but that's just south of Funen. And then the mainland of Denmark as well, like the peninsula, Jutland. There are quite a few places to go, but my experience of it is only where I've ever lived in Esbjerg, which isn't really a touristy place, and Aarhus, which is the second biggest city in Denmark, and that is worth visiting as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's start that over again then, and starting in Copenhagen. What are we going to do and see in Copenhagen?
So Copenhagen, it's obviously the most famous place in Denmark, probably the only place that people have heard of. Well, initially I'd start in Nyhavn. It's the little narrow strip of water with the iconic buildings either side.
Mm-hmm.
It's the picture everyone knows. If you want to bulk up your Instagram, that's the place to go. You also
exactly, and when the new haven, the new harbor, is what that means.
New harbour, exactly,
Yep.
Precisely, yeah. And just from there, you can actually get like a tour boat thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that takes you around all the islands just off of Copenhagen, like Papua, which is Paper Islands. It's the famous one that has all the restaurants. There's a lot of restaurants there with a lot of Michelin stars. The most famous one being Noma, which I've heard's closing or has just closed. I'm not entirely sure, but that's the one where the main dish was a dish that contained moss and ants. I've never eaten it. It's super expensive.
Is that why it closed?
Actually, I don't even know.
Well, and I should say, because we're going to be pronouncing a lot of Danish names in this episode. So first, apologies to people from Denmark. Now, in our defense, as a Brit and a Yank here trying to say Danish names, my grandfather, who was born in Denmark, used to describe to me Danish not as a language but as a throat ailment, because it's pronounced in kind of the back of the throat in a way that we have a little trouble with in English. So my apologies to our Danish listeners, to both of you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I used to live in Denmark. I learned to speak the language, and even after a year and a half of practice, I suck. So I can get the basics, but my pronunciation isn't very good. In Copenhagen, you also have a famous place called Tivoli. It's like a amusement park. It's tiny. It's about the size of, I don't know, like a block.
Oh, is Tivoli that small? I did not get there when I was there.
It's really small. Like, you can walk around it in, I'd say, 5 minutes.
Huh. Okay.
But it is the oldest amusement park in the country. Well, I think in Europe or possibly even the world. 1840 something.
Mm-hmm.
It was built. Yeah, it's amazing if you sort of walk through. I don't remember it being too expensive. Around 200 crowns, which in dollars is around 30, I guess.
Okay.
It's not too bad. You can spend a few hours in there despite it being really small. You can definitely sort of like go on some of the rides. I believe you can pay for the rides separately to have a cheaper ticket.
Okay.
But you probably are better off getting the full ticket, especially if you're with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And inside there's all sorts of like fanfare that you get from standard amusement parks. It's not going to be Universal Studios.
Do you have a favorite ride at Tivoli?
I'm the kind of guy that actually likes the ones that test your skills.
Okay.
So like coconut shies and things like that.
Okay.
They have bits and pieces like that pop up.
And the coconut shells, are you talking about the shell game here where you have to find the pea here? Or?
No, you throw a ball and knock it off.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. Games of skill.
That
Got
one,
it.
yeah.
Arcade games.
Yeah. There is a roller coaster in there. I didn't go on it because the queue was pretty long. I didn't really have that much time last time I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it looks pretty fun.
Okay.
Outside of that, you have the Grand Central Station. And if you arrive into Denmark, you can get a taxi to the centre of Copenhagen. Much faster, much cheaper, much easier. Get the train. It's like 15 minutes. It's about 40 crowns, which is $7. And it takes you right into the centre of the city. And that would take you, actually, that takes you to Tivoli as well.
Okay.
That's definitely worth the way forward. You've also got Christiania, which is the hippie commune area.
Right.
Everyone's heard of that because that's the place where you can sort of legally, not really legally, smoke weed if you're into that sort of thing. Personally, I'm not, but I have been around there and seen it, and it's just a hipster area. Everyone there's really friendly, and it's probably good to centralise things like that, and it keeps the rest of the city really safe.
Yeah, good point. And that's not all that far from the Nyhavn, just across the channel from there.
That's right, yeah. It's on an island. You can actually get the underground from Central Station there. It's 2 or 3 stops and a 5-minute walk. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to find. It's signposted and anyone will tell you where it is because it's super famous. If you're looking for something to eat, there are two areas that I would suggest you go to. The first one being the meatpacking districts, and it's an old area that used to be like slaughterhouses, things like that. And these days it's been redeveloped into some bars and restaurants, and they actually have like really sort of cheap, well, cheap by Copenhagen standards, food. And the food in Denmark is always of the highest quality, as you can imagine. Anywhere in Western Europe, it's good quality food. Meatpacking district, unless you're a vegetarian, is the best place to go for something to eat.
Where is the meatpacking district?
It's about 5 minutes from Central Station, but it's the opposite direction as if you was going out of Copenhagen. A 5 minute walk, possibly 10.
Okay.
As if you was going away from the sort of city centre.
Okay.
And the other place is Norbolt, which has the lakes. So if you look at a map of Copenhagen as well, you will also see like 3 big sort of oblong lakes just above the city centre.
Okay.
That actually has a lot of like really nice restaurants in it as well that are a fraction of the cost of the ones in the city centre. So I'd definitely suggest that you try them out. And it doesn't take long to walk there. It's from the centre of the city, it's 15 minutes maybe. Or you can just hire a bike and do it the Danish way.
Good point, right? Especially if we're there in the summertime, when better biking weather. Do you have a recommended time of year that you would go to Denmark or to Copenhagen?
Copenhagen year round, definitely.
Okay.
It's one of them sort of cities where there's always something going on. Last time I was there, it was October, and they had like a world festival on.
Okay.
That was really interesting. Actually, for Tivoli as well, they decorate Tivoli depending on the festivals, so that's quite cool.
Okay.
The rest of Denmark, not so much, because it does get really cold. It's not like things grind to a halt. They don't really get severe snow like they would in the rest of the Scandinavian region. It just gets too cold, really.
Okay.
Shoulder seasons are a lot cheaper, and they're great, but the summer is definitely the time to go, except for school holiday season, where it does peak the prices significantly, particularly in Ærø or any of the coastal areas.
Okay.
Before we wrap up Copenhagen, I will just mention I haven't been because I didn't get an opportunity last time, but they've just opened a new aquarium called Den Blå Planet, which is the Blue Planet. I think it's about 8 kilometres southeast of Copenhagen. So it's a train or a taxi. From what I've read and the people I know, because I have a lot of friends in Denmark as well, they've all said it's like the best aquarium that they've ever been to. So that could be worthwhile checking out as well.
Okay. They also have a fairly well-known opera house, if you're into that, that's set in the water across from New Haven. I did not get there. So I can't recommend that, but I've heard good things about it. Very modern building.
That's on Paper Island as well, actually.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Like if you take the little canal tour things, that takes you to the Little Mermaid as well. And that is the only time I'd recommend going to the Little Mermaid. Don't do it off your own back. It's just not worth it.
Okay,
it takes too long to get there. And
so the Little Mermaid, we have to mention the statue, though. So this is the relatively small statue. I think that's the other thing that's going to surprise people, of Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid character. It's, 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall?
Yeah, it's
not very
big. It's life size. It's just perched on a rock. It's life size, but obviously the way the mermaid is shaped, it's like 3 foot.
It is very popular, so hordes of tourists there, and if you're coming in on a cruise ship, which I did, for instance, then it's pretty much right there. But if you're downtown, it's a little walk away, and it's a nearly mandatory picture, but it's mostly crowds of tourists.
Pretty much, and you'll fight through them to get a glimpse of it, and you'll get a glimpse of it and think, I wish I stayed in my hotel or gone to Tivoli.
Now, the one thing I would say, though, is if you are going to walk from downtown, from Friedrichskirche or the palace that's downtown to the Little Mermaid, there is a Star Fortress in between. And so if you take that route, I think that is quite interesting and quite picturesque in itself.
Actually, the Star Fortress is way, way better than the Little Mermaid. And
I don't disagree.
I completely forgot about the Star Fortress, actually.
Well, and it's interesting. If you look at a map of Copenhagen, you can still tell where the medieval battlements were for the city over by Christiania, Freetown Christiana, for instance, you'll still see where that shape of the medieval city is, and then there will be some water off to the left over by the Star Fortress that you can still see where the other battlements would have been. Of course, now that's the inner part of the city. I would say anything within that is the old city. And then right on the edge of that, towards the water, is this old fortress that would have been protecting the city. But very interesting to see for those of us who are history buffs.
It's actually true of every city in Denmark that's coastal.
Oh,
You'll always see some evidence of a fortress.
Sure.
Even the smaller towns, there'll always be like, possibly not a fortress, but some kind of tower, at least like a warning tower or something.
Well, and speaking of tower, one of the things that we did, which I enjoyed, was we went up in the tower at, I would believe it was at the Christiansborg Palace, which is the tallest tower in town, for a good view of the old part of the city.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to get a free view or a cheap view of the city.
Yeah, not
Again,
free, but
I can't remember what the price was.
No, it wasn't too much though, as I recall. Well, and then some of the people we were with went up in the church whose name I'm going to see if I can come up with, the Church of Our Savior, which has the tower that has a ramp on it. That is over in that same part of town, the Christiana part of town. Beautiful, beautiful building. Anything else you would recommend we do in or see in Copenhagen?
The King's Palace.
Okay.
And its gardens. You can't usually go into the gardens because it's guarded. It's the Buckingham Palace of Copenhagen.
Right.
It's worth seeing. It's worth walking around the grounds, like the outer rim of the grounds, to check out. But it's not vitally important. It's just if you have some time to kill, it's definitely something worth doing. Other than that, yeah, relax in Copenhagen. Copenhagen's a really relaxed city. The people there are really, really friendly. I know you hear that for every episode that people talk about town, but they really are. And the Danes will use any excuse possible, and this is true of everywhere in Denmark, to practice their English with a native speaker because they pride themselves on their English skills.
Well, yeah, and you'll run into, in all of the Scandinavian countries, you'll run into quite a few people who speak very good English.
A lot of people that speak very good English. Unless you're talking to someone that's 6 years old or like 90,
right?
They're going to speak English, probably to a better standard than I can, to be honest.
Okay, anything else you would recommend we eat while we're in Copenhagen?
Food-wise, hot dogs are the things to get in Denmark.
Hot
This
dogs.
isn't just necessarily a Copenhagen thing. It's more of a Denmark thing itself. The hot dogs are really, really good.
Okay.
They're sort of street food in a way, like they're food to go.
Uh-huh.
And they have a sauce called remoulade, and it's like a mixture of tartar sauce, if you know what that is.
Yep.
Like a weak mustard and mayonnaise. It sounds disgusting, but it's interesting and it's pretty nice. And that's the sauce they generally put in their hot dogs. They're like open hot dogs.
Okay.
Rather than the American ones, they sort of slot it inside of a bun.
Okay.
They're pretty cheap. They're really good. Oh, they usually throw onions or pickles on them as well.
Okay.
The other things to get, obviously pastries. They call them wienerbrot out there. It's like Viennese bread. It's actually Danish pastries originate from Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they got the name Danish, but they're really good as well. Like you can get giant ones from the local kiosks, 7-Elevens and things like that, and that'll feed a family of 4. Some of them, they're huge, and they're relatively cheap. Food in Denmark can be expensive. Mm-hmm. It's a Nordic country, so everything is going to be relatively expensive compared to, say, the US or Britain. It's not as expensive as, say, Sweden, though. The national dish is smørrebrød, which is buttering bread, it translates to. And it's just rye breads or maybe some toast or something like that, where they just have pâtés, pickles, meats, cheeses, eggs, fish, fresh vegetables, beetroots, things like that. And it's just open sandwiches that you kind of build yourself.
Okay.
Again, that's the sort of foods that I would suggest that people get if they are in Copenhagen because it's unique. It's something you're not really going to try anywhere else. And my top tip for Denmark is the tap water there is of the highest quality. It's really, really good. And bottled water is really expensive. So you have a refillable bottle or just buy one bottle of water and get any of your hotels or restaurants to fill the bottle up for you. Mm-hmm. You'll save yourself a lot of money that way as well.
Well, and pretty much anywhere in Europe, the water's going to be safe to drink. So here you're just saying you're going to enjoy it a little more. Okay.
It's way better than the water we get in London, for instance, and
Okay.
the water we get in London is pretty good as well. A bottle of water out there is going to be like $7 or $8 for
Okay.
500 ml. So you will save a lot of money if you get it filled up.
And before we leave the Copenhagen area, are there day tours that you would do from Copenhagen?
Yes, actually, I would go to Helsingør.
So that's Hamlet's castle.
That's Cornborg
Oh, it's
Slots,
Kronborg.
is what
Oh,
they call
sorry.
it. Yeah, Hamlet's Castle's there as well. It's a UNESCO site.
Hmm.
It's 45 minutes on a train from Copenhagen. You can do it in a day. There's no need to stay up there. You can stay up there if you wish to.
Hmm.
I don't really see the point because you can do it in a few hours. And the city itself, or town of Helsingør, is flooded with Swedes because they can buy cheap alcohol on the ferry.
Okay.
The castles to get into, we paid 70 krona, and that's around $11-ish.
Okay.
It's stunning. Obviously, you spend 3 or 4 hours walking around the grounds. You can see all the bits and pieces to do with Hamlet as well. They do like amateur theatre shows there, which are pretty cool. It's not really like an arranged thing. It's more just impromptu people doing it, it seems. Much like you'll see people in Leicester Square of London or Times Square in New York doing bits and pieces for spare change. That's definitely a good day tour to do. Pretty inexpensive as well. The other one I would say is Roskilde, which is the old capital of Denmark. You probably will want to spend a bit more time here than you would in Helsingør, purely because there's more to do. Like the old city itself is more or less preserved. There's a lot of preservation that's gone on with like the Viking settlements and things like that. There's a Viking ship museum there, which
Okay.
is inexpensive to get into, it's $15, something like that. And you can do like a guided tour of the area. They've got 5 Viking longboats that they've pulled out from the sea, which they've sort of semi-restored. And they'll talk you through some of like the old traditional techniques of how they built them. So you'll see guys with axes chipping down at wood, building Viking ships. If you've got kids, it's really child friendly. When I was there was a load of children running around pretending to be Vikings with plastic axes and things like that. The kids love it. The other thing to do there in Roskilde is, well, if you're there at the right time of year, you can go to one of the biggest music festivals in the world, Roskilde Festival. It's almost about as big as Glastonbury. If you check out any of like the biggest bands in the world right now, and if you check their like live tours, you can almost be certain that at least one is going to be playing at Roskilde Festival, headlining, which again is very easy to get to from Copenhagen. And finally, there's a UNESCO site there of the Cathedral of Roskilde, which was built in 1200s.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually go up inside it, get really picturesque views as you can with the tower you were talking about in Copenhagen. It's well worth checking that out as well. And you probably will need to stay overnight in Roskilde, but it's just an inexpensive town compared to Copenhagen anyway.
So maybe this would be as we leave Copenhagen, if we're going over to Jylland, we would stop here on our way.
I'd say so. If you're only in Copenhagen for a week, then obviously spend a night here. But if you are doing the rest of Denmark, then you absolutely must stay here, in my opinion.
Excellent. Where to next?
On to Fyn, the next island along.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle island, not quite as big. And to a city called Odense, which is the birthplace of Hans Christian Andersen. And there they celebrate him like they celebrate no other. They have his house there and it's preserved, but the street that his house is on, they've kind of like cobbled it off and made it look like it would have looked like when he was alive. And they have all these storytelling activities, amateur theatre. The theatre is always in Danish, but it's pretty universally understood because a lot of Hans Christian Andersen's stories are more visual. So kids of all ages will get it anyway. It's really cheap to go around the museum as well. I don't remember it being more than 100 crowns.
Okay.
That may have changed because I was there 2 years ago. Then there's a free walking tour that you can do as well from Rathus, which is the city hall, I guess, town hall. And that took about 3 hours, and that took us around Odense, some of the old districts. We stopped off for a coffee along the way. Our tour guide was really knowledgeable. He told us about absolutely everything in immaculate English. And he spoke German as well, because we had some German people with us.
Mm-hmm.
So the walking tour is definitely worth doing. It will make you sort of like understand Danish culture a lot more.
Hmm.
And Danish culture is quite difficult to get a grasp of because at first things seem really strange, but actually it's quite logical. You've probably heard the word hygge.
Hmm.
It means cozy, but it's got like a deeper meaning to it than cozy.
I think of it as a cozy time with friends sort of thing, that there's a community aspect with Huga, as I recall.
It is, yeah, and it's about inviting people in and warmth, not necessarily to your house, but into like a more of a spiritual thing.
Hmm.
But the Danes take that extremely seriously, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
hygge aspect. And walking tours or just speaking with some Danish people, they really will sort of make you feel and believe it. Odense also has the best zoo in Denmark, and that's a quote. That's not my opinion, although it's the only zoo I've been to in Denmark, so it might be. It does have a really large sort of like African savanna area
Okay.
with standard savanna type animals that you see, such as lions, giraffes, and chimpanzees, and things like that. And that is pretty cool. It's good day out for the kids as well if they're into that sort of thing.
Okay.
That's more or less all I'd recommend in Windsor. Actually, it's a city that's a stop off between Copenhagen and the mainland,
Okay.
but it's a really worthwhile one because of the Hans Christian Andersen aspect.
Yeah, sounds like it would be. Then we're off to the mainland.
No, south of Fyn, there's a little island called Ærø, which you can get to from Svendborg, which is on the south of Fyn.
Okay.
Take a little ferry. It's just a really nice island that's worth sort of cycling around. Like the capital of the island is a small town called Ærøskøbing, which is it's just like a fairy tale actually. The town.
Hmm.
It's 18th century. There's no modern construction, or if there is, it's built to traditional methods. It's a great sort of like island just to cycle around. It's different vibes to Denmark. It's much more hygge than I'd say any of the cities. But
Okay.
again, like the rural areas generally are. It's got beautiful beaches as well, and it's if you are in the summer, it's definitely worth going there because it has some of the best beaches in Denmark. Relax, have a barbecue on the beach with some locals, have a couple of beers, share some stories, and it just adds a different dynamic than say Copenhagen or Aarhus would.
Okay.
If you wasn't aware as well, Denmark has a lot of coastline just
Yes.
due to the island. It actually has more coastline per mile than India, which may surprise you.
Interesting. Yeah, that would definitely surprise me.
I wouldn't be so sure if the quality of the coastline is as good as the quality in India, weather-wise. But hey, there's a lot of beaches there, and for my money, Ærø is probably the best that I've been to,
Okay.
or the entire island itself. That's right on the south. You can actually get a ferry to Germany from there as well, I believe. So onto the mainland.
Okay.
So there's two parts of the mainland that I want to speak to you about. You've covered skiing in the far north previously on another podcast, and I can't actually add anything to that because what the guy said was pretty spot on.
Okay. So that's what you're saying is the episode we did on Denmark years and years ago. Go back and listen to that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's the one. But the two parts I want to talk about. The first one is Billund, which you may actually arrive into Denmark from because it's the biggest airport in Denmark on the mainland side of it, second biggest in the country after Copenhagen.
Okay.
And that's where you've got Legolands. And for anyone who doesn't know, Denmark is the home of Lego. It was invented in Denmark. And Lego actually is short for Lego, which means play well or play good.
I did not know that. Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was Lego crazy as a kid, so and then
There we
again
go.
as a parent of kids.
I'm Lego. I'm 32 years old and I still play Lego with my nephew. So
Sure.
there's no train actually to Billund. Everywhere else that I've discussed, you can actually get through on rail. Danish rail is immaculate. It's on time. It's relatively inexpensive. It's what you would imagine a Scandinavian train to be like.
Mhm.
Billund you can't actually get to by train, but you can hire a car from Vejle. Vejle's sort of maybe the nearest train station or city with a train station. And it's about, I don't know, half an hour away by bus, but you can drive and it's a little bit quicker. Renting a car is obviously another option. If you're in Legoland, you're probably going to be there for a significant amount of time, possibly even overnight, because it's fairly large. I mean, again, it's not as large as Universal Studios or any of the big theme parks in Florida or any in Tokyo or anything like that, but it's still relatively big for Europe. And it's going to be somewhere for the kids if you have kids, or I'll go on my own because I love it. But they have all these structures that they've built out of Lego. So last time I was there, they had Odense, the previous city I've just spoken about, the town centre of Odense. Every building in its position made out of Lego on a miniature scale.
Okay.
They had an Eiffel Tower made out of Lego, which was bigger than I expected it to be. You can also go on like loads of little rides as you would for any fairground sort of thing. There's little go-kart things that kids can do, and they can pick up their first driving license, things like that. And there's Lego men running around with the big Lego heads, speaking Danish or perfect English. It's just a lot of fun, actually. Like, if no one's ever been to Legoland, go to a Legoland. They're a lot more fun than people think they are.
Okay.
So after Legoland, if you do decide to go, I would say Aarhus. It's the second biggest city in Denmark, and it's fun. It's a really cool little town, actually. Predominantly a university town, so you'll have a lot of like youth in the area, and it's not like drunken, abusive youth that you might get in like any of the big cities around the world. They're very like sensible, study orientated. But it does mean there's cheap bars around as well, which is always a good thing. Aarhus has an old town, and not like an old town that any other city has. It's more the sort of street that they've sort of sectioned off, and they've taken really old buildings from around Denmark, like 400-500-year-old buildings,
Okay.
and re-erected them in this town. Den Gamle By is the name of it, and it's like walking through history. So 300 years ago or 200 years ago, and there's loads of people dressed up in old style clothing and people walking around horse and carriages. You'll have people selling you, like, they use the traditional methods of baking.
Okay.
Or like confectionery, clothing, things like that. It is really like stepping back 200 years. That's fun. That's a lot of fun. And you'll have people like cosplaying, saying like, "Oh, we're going to go to America because we've heard of all these great opportunities that they have there. We're just waiting for a ship to arrive," and things like that. It's quite incredible, actually. The other thing is the Old Quarter is like more of a traditional old town. It's full of bars, cafes, restaurants, and then you have like a modern art gallery, which is odd. I don't know if any of the listeners have been to London, but it's the Tate Modern version of like Denmark's Tate Modern.
Oh, okay.
It has all the new style art that most people don't really understand. I don't understand anyway.
Well, and you talked about enjoying the old town in the summer and eating outdoors and such. Remember, too, that if you do come in the summer months, we're talking about quite a lot of sunlight. It's going to stay late till at the solstice probably after 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I think sunset at its peak is usually around 10:30 in the evening.
Yeah.
And sunrise again is like
About
5 in the
4.
morning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Remember to close those blackout curtains unless you want to wake up at 4 o'clock.
The other thing is there's a prehistory museum there, which has loads of artifacts from the Stone Age and the Iron Age and the Viking Age as well. A lot of the rune stones are there. So if you don't understand anything about rune stones or like Norse mythology, this is a really good place to sort of learn that sort of thing. And they do go in depth about the Viking Age and how the Vikings had their trade networks, and how Norway was incorporated into that as well. If you don't know, like, the Vikings are two factions. There's the Norwegians and the Danes. Although they're both bracketed as Vikings, the Norse are from Norway and Danes are from Denmark. So if you ever hear anything about Norse, it's because it comes from Norway.
Okay.
Anyway, the museums do go into much more detail than what I can. There's a bog man in there. So it was a guy who was sacrificed to some of the pagan gods, the Norse gods. It's like one of the most perfectly preserved humans that they've ever discovered. And they managed to reconstruct what they think his face would look like and things like that. It does go into like quite a lot of detail about how people lived pre sort of Christian times and hundreds, thousands of years ago even.
Well, and you were talking about the Vikings. Viking used to be a verb. The Viking wasn't the people. The Viking was what you did. You went off Viking, which was pillaging mostly, and then eventually settling. Yeah. But and then we left out the Swedes there, and I don't want to leave out the Swedes. They tended to head in the other direction, though. They went off and, for a time, conquered what is now Russia, which we'll talk about on the episode previous to this when we're talking about Russia. So,
yeah, I think that was slightly after the Viking era.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like 1600 to Swedes. Swedish Empire was quite big.
Well, no, this is before that. This is relatively during the Viking era. The Swedes had a big impact on Russia, but they very quickly assimilated into a Russian aristocracy.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah. Okay, it's interesting. This one they speak more in depth about the British Isles and Iceland and Greenland and the parts of France, things like that. It didn't really mention anything about Sweden, so that I would suggest is more or less all I can talk about in Denmark. Excellent. I know that there is more things in the north with skiing, and actually, like a really good itinerary is what I've suggested, and add in skiing on.
Well, and then the episode that we're going to recommend, if you listen to this one and you still want more and you want to know a little bit more about that northern tip, is episode 74 of the Amateur Traveler. So way back in 2006 would be when we recorded that. So,
blimey, yeah.
Excellent. What's going to surprise me about Denmark?
How easy it is. How easy it is to get around. How easy it is to communicate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really easy. Apart from maybe the UK, it's a great starting block for anyone from the US, just because the language, people speak immaculate English, as we spoke about earlier, and it's really easy. It's efficient as well.
One thing you miss about Denmark now that you're back home again?
I miss Smørrebrød a lot. The food I was talking about earlier, the open sandwiches.
The open sandwiches, okay.
Because they're unique, and you can't get them. You can replicate them in England, but they're not the same. They're never going to be the same.
You're standing in the prettiest spot in Denmark. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
I'm standing in Ejby, looking across the coast with a campfire next to me and a bottle of lager in my hand, staring into the sea.
Okay, and then put that on the map for me again, because I'm losing you.
Ejby is the small island at the bottom.
Got it.
That I spoke about. Is
that we're going to go down and bike around. Okay, that's where I thought you were talking about, but I couldn't quickly find the name of it. Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Denmark.
When you try and cross the road and an angry cyclist tells you off for walking in the cycle path.
Well, there's a few places like that in Europe, especially. Watch out for the cyclists. They can be a little more aggressive than the people are when they're not in bikes. Yeah,
absolutely. And they'll tell you off in immaculate English.
Yeah. Excellent. And if you had to summarize Denmark in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Easy.
Okay.
Clean.
Okay.
And rustic.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Joe Trevillion. Now, Joe, you don't have a travel blog, but do you want to send people to your Instagram to see pictures of your travel?
Yeah, I've got a Instagram called Reasons to Visit, and it's not so much pictures for myself, it's more giving people inspiration to travel and to see various parts of the world. I'm also part of a group called the Global Convoy, and they tend to drive around the world. I'm actually doing that in a month. So I'll have loads of posts up about driving around Europe as well.
Excellent. So this is something that people should look more into if they want to do a road trip with strangers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Interesting. I'll have to look it up. Joe, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Denmark.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Not much news here in the community segment of the show other than to say I am on the road. I'm in Florida for a couple weeks and then also going to Alabama. If you want to track my travels so that you can run into me, as I actually ran into a listener of the show at dinner tonight, which doesn't happen that often, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which you can find on the website. Also, check out the deals page, amateurtraveler.com/deals, that I'm planning on updating with some more recent deals that I have found that will also help support the show. And with that, we'll end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at Amateur Traveler. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.